because they'll perish, so they don't have a good shelf life.
Yeah,
What
I was
else?
gonna say demand
What's
is
that?
high.
The demand is low.
Yeah.
What else? And why is demand low?
Cost is probably higher.
So it's cost prohibitive. So the hood as an economic model makes sense if we're capitalists, right? So why would cashing a check be more expensive than the hood than going to a bank using an economic model?
There's less banks, so they can charge whatever they want.
So there's less competition, so they can charge whatever they want. Why else? What did we say about the corner store?
Convenience.
Convenience. So it's the easy thing to do. What else? If I'm going to a cashing place, why don't I just go to the bank?
You don't have a bank account.
So I don't have a bank account. Why might I not have a bank account?
You don't have an ID.
So I might not have an ID, but I can get an ID. That's easy. You know, you just get a state ID. Why else might I not have
Credit.
credit? What about credit? Some banks don't. TCF? I don't think they do a credit check.
Social Security number?
You have to have a minimum sometimes?
So you have to have a minimum. What else might be prohibitive?
Transportation.
You don't have a car to get there. What else? What happens when you bounce a check?
You pay double.
You pay a fee.
So you might not qualify for a bank account.
What happens when you bounce? Anybody ever had the domino effect?
Yeah.
You buy a cup of coffee, you had some other checks out there, so you end up spending $250 for that cup of coffee,
Yes.
right?
Brutal.
Yeah. What happens when you don't pay it back?
They're gonna track that.
They're gonna track that. So now, can't get another bank account
Right.
until you pay that thing. And you should have paid it because you should balance your checkbook. Personal responsibility. You have to take personal responsibility. And some of y'all have bounced checks too, right? Okay, so we'll keep going. All right.
Yeah, but now I have balance protection.
Brookings Institution report, buying a car in a low-income neighborhood costs as much as $500 more than in an affluent community. Cashing a check, add up to 10% more. Furniture, appliances, and even groceries are more expensive. Researchers call this the poverty tax.
Until last year, I worked 2 jobs.
I worked 2 jobs too before.
My daughter used to say like, "Mom, stop." She says she doesn't want to see her mom or dad work like that. Now I take this.
Patients like Y who come in very sick, we patch them up, we save their lives and send them out back in the same environment.
For calcium, potassium, I could take it 4 o'clock.
I think we sometimes forget that people who live in more well-off communities have a lot of advantages because they do have a lot of the environmental support. Well, why are these neighborhoods so different? And of course, these differences are not a natural thing. They arise as a result of policies or the absence of policies that create these enormous spatial inequalities in resources and in the environments that people live.
"60 years ago, Richmond was a boomtown.
Here was assembled one of the nation's largest industrial armies.
During World War II, the Kaiser shipyards in Richmond ran 24 hours a day. The war effort drew workers of all ethnicities to Richmond. When the war ended, new governmental policies brought sweeping changes to communities like Richmond. As the shipyards closed, thousands of jobs left. So did anyone who could. But only white families could get the new government-backed mortgages to buy homes in the new suburbs. Richmond's population fell by a third.
We had vast public investments in building the suburbs of America. Federally supported loans, FHA loans, went to people who were moving to the suburbs, and for many years, up until the 60s, those loans were available on a racially restricted basis. African Americans and other people of color didn't have access to them.
Until 1962, out of $120 billion in government-backed home loans, less than 2% went to non-white households. In Northern California, between the war and 1960, of 350,000 federally guaranteed new home loans, less than 100 went to black families. In cities like Richmond, African Americans were left behind in increasingly neglected neighborhoods. In the 1980s, poor Latino and Southeast Asian immigrants began joining them in these same neighborhoods.
Once the community starts to go downhill, nobody wants to actually invest in the community, so the banks don't want to come in and the shops don't want to come in. Then you don't have a commercial base, you don't have the community taxes that can then feed back into the schools. Now you don't have good schools, so families don't want to move into the community if they don't have to because you don't have good schools, and you get a sort of vicious cycle of everybody who can will leave the community.
This isn't something that happens overnight, and it isn't the fault of the people who live there. The people who live in low-income, disinvested communities did not do this to themselves.
20 years before his heart attack, Kwai tried to move his family out of Richmond, but 11 months later, they had to move back.
I can't find my job up there, and she can't find her job up there. And moved back, my older son, hang around with the wrong group and then use some kind of drug. I just don't know what to do. I try to help him. I try to straighten him out. Spend a lot of money, owe people a lot of money. That's what in my mind all the time. So it's worry, just worry. When I'm going to pay up all of this, and how I'm going to do it.
If you think about when you're worried, you're always a little bit more activated. There's a little bit more vigilance. You're sort of checking things out a little bit more carefully. And if you can imagine that happening day after day, all day, every day, it's exhausting. And it wears on the body system.
When stress is chronic, when we're endlessly worried about our bills, our job, our children's safety, the body pumps out cortisol and adrenaline. But too much of these stress hormones over time can increase arterial plaque, raise blood pressure, and weaken our immune system, increasing our risk for almost every chronic disease, including heart disease, the leading killer in America.
We've done studies that have shown that living in disadvantaged neighborhoods is related to an increased risk. It's about 50 to 80% increase in risk of developing heart disease. And this has been replicated in other studies.
In our society today, everybody experiences stress. However, in many disadvantaged communities, what we have is the accumulation of multiple negative stressors, and it's so many of them, it's as if someone is being hit from every single side. And it's not only that they're dealing with a lot of stress, they have few resources to cope.
Our strategy is work together where we live is like you as leader.
The health challenges of low-income Laotians, Vietnamese, and Cambodians are often masked when they're lumped together as Asian Americans.
We're talking about justice, right?
Gwai's cousin, Torm Normpersert, organizes his community to address local health and environmental problems, joining forces with other activists in Richmond.
Richmond is a very diverse community, and there is a very rich and historical network of community agencies and community organizations. That's been enhanced by the new waves of immigrants who've brought and developed their own community agencies to address health problems.
One of the greatest health challenges to the community and its children is exposure to violence. In 2005, Richmond had one of the highest murder rates in the United States.
Somebody just came and knocked at the door. She came out, she said, "Who's that, Dad?" I said, "I don't know. Just don't open the door." And then I heard it sound like they knock again, and I ran back. It wasn't a knock. They already shoot her.
Dốc nó cười đâu mà nào. Được pin là có phun lại nàng im là bóng cô. Dốc nó phải lòng này cười chăm chăm tâm mơ gọi ra.
Gwai and Kanorn's daughter Chan was a successful student who became the mistaken target of a Southeast Asian drug gang.
The specter of community violence has completely transformed the way that people live in certain neighborhoods. So it's a public health issue not only for the prevention of premature death through homicide, but for the ripple effects it has on the other things that contribute to people's poor health, the ability of people to go out, to go shopping, to live a normal life.
In fact, research now suggests that some adult health problems may be traced to living with violence as a child.
The impact of that stress, the impact of that exposure to violence, triggers physiological responses in a child and can actually be disruptive to the developing brain and the developing immune system, such that you are primed then to be more vulnerable to physical and mental health problems all through your life.
When I'm outside, I hear gunshots in there by the school. And I also hear some gunshot too, right there.
We worked with the kids in Richmond, and many of those kids didn't think they would live beyond the age of 20. So we proposed to do a study on hope, trying to show kids that they can work their life around so that they do have a future.
And take a photo to write about it.
The program that resulted, Youth Empowerment Strategies, or YES, helps youth develop a sense of hope by showing them at an early age how, by their actions, they can work together to create positive change in their community.
We're in this program B5, and we came up with the project.
Hope impacts health because then you don't internalize a lot of the behaviors about feeling hopeless and feeling alienated from society. What it is that you do is you feel proactive and you realize that you have a say in how things can be. And so you engage in making things be that way.
That's why we do it.
Control over our environment gives us reason to be hopeful, and hope is an often overlooked factor for good health. But how might a neighborhood's residents gain that control? 800 miles north in Seattle, Washington, at High Point, public health and housing agencies and developers took a radical approach to give one neighborhood some of the health advantages found in wealthier communities. 60 years ago, High Point was a lot like Richmond. It began in the 40s as housing for temporary defense workers. By the 1990s, High Point housing had deteriorated.
These were built for temporary housing. We told the neighborhood they'll only be here a few years, and they're still here 60 years later.
I lived in the apartment here on the inn on Graham here, and it's right there behind that little tree. I felt anxious, because bullets were flying, and you did not know when that was going to happen or what the consequences would be.
If it was unsafe outside, it was unhealthy inside. Asthma was endemic.
This is one of the old units. It's a pretty nasty looking one. The family has just moved out of here though. Into one of the new units. There's the leaking off the windows that over the years lets the plasterboard soak and mold will form all along there, as you can see here. They didn't just have a mold problem, but with the moisture, you get more dust mites that are a common asthma trigger. A lot of mold growth under there and nice places for the roaches to live and thrive. Not a healthy home.
In the old High Point, 1 out of 9, 1 out of 10 households were affected by asthma. Pretty much everybody knew somebody who had asthma in the community. It's almost like it was normal. Asthma was so commonplace, it was normal.
By 1997, it was clear to the city and residents that it was time to make a change.
There was a community here. Even though this was a rough, dangerous neighborhood, there was still a community here. And people living in communities actually know what they want.
They wanted the kind of healthy living conditions that wealthier neighborhoods usually take for granted. Working with Seattle Housing Authority and the Public Health Department, the community won federal grants to rebuild High Point.
Seattle Housing Authority worked really hard to invite communities to the table and share in the design and access to power. Low-income people, they're used to not having power, so they don't know they even can have power.
What emerged from the design process was a new mixed-income community with health as its focus.
Incredible.
We sold 9 of them on Saturday.
Oh, did you?
Absolutely.
Oh, that's amazing.
Our hope is that the High Point community now will be integrated with the rest of the surrounding neighborhood and make it easy for people to walk to stores or parks in the neighborhood as a whole. There is a new clinic that's been built here, a new public library that's been built here, so those services will be available right on site to residents as well. And then there'll be a community center, and that will have all sorts of other services such as employment services and childcare and the like.
The new High Point has community gardens where gardeners can sell their organic produce to neighbors.
Another factor that we know promotes health is for people to be socially connected, and having a lot of spaces that promote social interaction was a conscious design element here.
One health problem community developers were determined to take on was asthma. Nationwide, the cost of asthma in healthcare and lost school and work days is staggering. $20 billion every year. Low in
there. So the two communities that they were showing, it's very clear. What do you think the outcome will be of the second community in Seattle? What's that? They'll be a lot healthier, and mentally. They'll be a lot healthier physically, mentally. And so economically, we can rationalize why those things exist. As professionals, why is it important for us to recognize the impact of place on our clients? Okay, so social embeddedness.
We understand that we get a better understanding of where they come from and what the stressors are outside of the stressors that they may bring into a session.
Okay, so we'll understand the stressors that they're bringing into a session. So it explains their life tasks.
Just basic life skills.
Okay. And explain some basic life skills. Does anyone have the packet from Saturday? Can you just grab that just for a second? There's a page after the box that we filled the pluses and the minuses in, and it says know the code. So what I'm suggesting is that as we work with folks, it's important to know kind of where they come from, but all human behavior is goal-directed, and culture is an adaptation to the context. And so when we talk about poverty and wealth, it's important that we, understand the context, and sometimes it's important for our clients to also understand the context. And so what we know is that this comes from Dr. Ruby Payne and her culture of poverty. And in terms of poverty, what Dr. Payne says is that possessions are the most, if we look at the category of possessions for people in poverty, their most prized possession is family. So you'll say, why do those poor people keep having those babies? Because it is a value to them. It is a possession to them. For middle class folks, it's things, getting a boat, a cabin, an ATV. For people in wealth, it's unique items. What are things that not everybody else can afford, that I can have that is exclusive and unique to me? In terms of money, people in poverty, money is to be spent. In the middle class, money is to be saved, and for the wealthy, money is to be invested. The verbs that are associated with spending and investing are exactly the same, but what is the difference between spending and investing? Spending is not seeking a return, right? So it's giving it out and not seeking a return. In terms of food, people in poverty want lots of quantity, right? That becomes a value. Did you get enough to eat? So I will go to McDonald's and buy off the value meal as opposed to going to Culver's and getting both sandwiches because I can get more at McDonald's than I can at Culver's. That's just an example. In terms of middle class, quality, did you enjoy the meal? How did that taste? And then for those in wealth, it's about the presentation. And so I don't know if you've been to French restaurants or seen some of those shows. Those portions are awfully little. How can you really enjoy that? Because it's more about the show in terms of these things. Time for the folks in poverty, the most pressing time is now. Survival mode, doing it now. There is no tomorrow. There is only today. There's only now. Middle class, in terms of time, history is important. And then for folks of wealth, leaving a legacy or creating a legacy is important. In terms of destiny, people in poverty oftentimes believe in fate, that things happen because they're supposed to happen, or they happen just because they've been ordained. Middle class folks believe in choice, that you have a choice between this and that. And then folks in wealth believe in manifest destiny. These things are happening because they're supposed to happen to me. In terms of folks in poverty, the family system typically is very matriarchal. So the mother is the cornerstone or the key or the leader in the family. In middle class families, oftentimes it's patriarchal, so the father is. And in families of wealth, it is whoever has the most money drives the agenda. And again, poverty motivation is survival. Middle class, the motivation is hard work, good work ethic. And for the folks in wealth, their motivation is connection. How do I connect with other people to advance all of my other things? And so understanding that I'm not stereotyping or trying to say that this is the way that you can diagnose someone who is in one of these class categories, but is it helpful to understand where folks are coming from given this particular model? Is this model could this model be a helpful model?
I mean, like with the possessions and family and poverty, like that makes so much sense to me. Like when you were explaining it, it's like, oh, I get it. Yeah.
That was the baby.
Yeah, like just you see families that are struggling and they keep having kids and you're like, you can't afford the ones you have, why are you doing this?
Why are you having more kids and you can't afford the ones you have?
And you feel bad for them, but then in all reality, they're doing this because this is how they view, so it makes so much, that helped me a lot with that.
Yeah. And if you don't have any other enjoyment, if I can't afford to go to the movies, if I can't afford to go on a cruise, I can afford to do the nasty, right? So that's from a movie, Hollywood Shuffle. Okay, all right, I'm way old. And then there's some other things to kind of think about, just some words. What I often talk about is that your net work is equal to your net worth. Right? So the people that you know equal what your net worth is. And oftentimes, people in poverty don't know, quote unquote, know the right people, quote unquote, to get things done. And so part of what we do is we connect them. We say, look, You've been traveling in this circle for this long. Has that gotten you where you wanted to go? Let's try another circle. Let's expose you to some newer, different people. One of the things that they didn't say about Seattle is that the city of Seattle has a particular focus on creating racial equity throughout all of its systems. And so that shows up when they say this low-income community should have access just like our other communities. And so what does investing in this low-income community do for the reputation of Seattle? It increases it. It pays huge dividends in terms of people wanting to move to Seattle because all of their communities look like they're thriving and that they're doing well. And it's because the city has a commitment to making sure that these things happen.
Are other cities modeling?
What's that?
Are other cities modeling?
You know what? Minneapolis and St. Paul are trying to do their best to model what they're doing.
Where did it start, that Seattle thing?
So not this mayor, but 2 mayors ago. So about 8 years ago, they started doing this racial equity lens in everything that they do.
Is that called racial equity?
Yep, it's called a racial equity lens.
So is that a discussion Minneapolis is having?
Yep, so we've brought in, Minneapolis and St. Paul, both have brought in consultants and city folks from the city of Seattle to try to replicate those things here. The thing about trying to replicate something is that there are lots of different political agendas there than there are here. So you can't just take a model and plunk it down because there's a lot of players involved, both good and bad, right? So
are they saying that the dividend with this outweighed the social, like if we look through the capitalistic model though, that we've been talking about, what is their vested interest in this? Like how do you convince someone who is capitalistic minded to buy into something like this?
So if I don't have dust mites, if I don't have black mold, if I don't have lead paint in houses, what is that going to decrease off the top?
Oh, healthcare costs.
Healthcare costs, right? So right off the top, we've just taken people out of the emergency rooms and we've saved X amount of dollars already, right? Now, if we don't have crime, if we don't have those things, then I can cut the police force budget. I mean, so we can quantify it that way as well. I hesitate to go there as the plan A, but as a plan to make sure that we're able to have a communication or talk with people in a language that they can understand, right? So, yeah, some people want those straight numbers. What's the impact? What do I get for my tax dollars? All of that kind of stuff. I would also say that you will either pay on the front end or you pay on the back end. You either educate them and let them grow up in a healthy way, or you pay for them to rot in prison. You'll pay, either the front end or the back end. And it's cheaper on the front end than it is on the back end. But people, make choices around that stuff. So cool. That's the majority of today's lecture. I had some other stuff I was going to do. I think we did some more important stuff earlier, and I appreciate that. I will tell you that we've reached out and tried to make some connections with the previous instructor. So know that's in the works for future stuff to try to reach them. Until that is able to happen, I'm going to ask you to do something that's very uncomfortable for me to ask you to do, which is, can you email me your previous papers?
Sure.
So I'm embarrassed to ask you to email me your previous papers, but if you could do that, that would be great. Otherwise, I will not have access. I don't have access to those.
Sure.
Yeah, we have all the.
Yeah.
Hi.
Oh, it's coming, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it's.
Yeah.
I can just get it on the
Yeah, it's very easy. It's just Andre Cohen.
Andre.Cohen?
Andre.Cohen@alfredadler.edu.
What if you got a grade back from the teacher? Can I just do that?
Yep, you can submit me.
I'd like to keep that grade.
Yeah.
You got a grade back? You got a grade back?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah.
Did you too?
Yeah. I think it was like a handful of us that.
Okay, so a handful of you may have gotten a grade. Please submit your paper with that grade attached to it.
And what about for
okay?
the next paper?
And for the next paper, email that to me.
Okay, so she asked me to rewrite my paper and I did, so
Yep.
do you want the first
I want the
one?
rewritten version.
Do you want the first one, the second one, and the third one? What do you want?
I want the one that you were going to submit to her.
You want, I did, I submitted it all.
Then I want you to submit it, I want it, give it to me all.
Okay, I'll do the
I can
first
take
one.
it, I got all of it. Yep.
The next paper, are you gonna send out like specific instructions, or you just want us to follow her instructions?
Follow her instructions.
However,
We
there's no
did
right
say,
or wrong model.
what's that?
There's no right or wrong model.
There's no right or wrong
Yeah,
model.
whatever you see.
Except for the white racial frame, if you're applying it to anybody else that's not white.
Also, I have a question about the case vignettes.
Yes.
When are they like due? Like we had, like, isn't that an
Yeah,
assignment?
see, she never gave us that.
Yeah.
Okay. She didn't give it to you? Neither am I.
Okay. All right.
So, wait, but is there gonna be a special project?
He said neither am I.
There is going to be a special
No,
project,
case vignette.
which is what you're doing in your groups.
Right. No, that's a group presentation. That's a case
That
vignette.
wasn't supposed to be.
Oh, that's where you say yes.
Oh, yeah.
Whoa.
Can that be the, can that be the special project?
Yes.
Yeah, so the special project is the 45-hour of tracking of like articles and
Yep.
videos and all that fun stuff.
I don't think.
But
No,
I
no,
thought
no,
the case
that is
vignette-
it.
We were supposed to talk about the final paper.
Bye, thank you.
So, it was supposed to be, there were supposed to be 4 vignettes. Was
Yeah,
the-
but that's a part of our presentation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, that's what I was saying.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Just go with it. Just go with it, people.
So don't worry about it. That's what he's saying. I was like,
Okay, I'm okay with that.
yeah, I know. That's what I was like, okay. Yeah, I was starting to get concerned because I looked on the syllabus and I said, is one of them due today? And how do I do it? So.
It's like logging interns.
Yeah, he said he's not gonna give us that as an assignment, so.
Submit those 45, those
It's just
logs
45
get
hours of
submitted to
logs.
me. The 45-hour log gets, you submit that to me.
Yeah, and that's a
From
special
what we
time.
worked on for our group project.
No, that
No.
is your own special time.
That's your own special project. You have to do 45
So like read
hours
articles and stuff
of,
that's on
so reading
multicultural.
books,
Reading books.
looking at videos.
Well, we could do like just biracial, right? Or just.
Oh, so we just.
Yeah. Anything around what we've been talking about.
So it's your own.
It's your own special it is you,
Yeah.
by yourself.
You're spending
You
45
have
hours
to turn
outside
in
of
a log
class
to me that
doing more
says
research.
what you've
So like,
done
for
with that
example, like he said,
45.
there's might be stuff like on Native Americans we might not talk about, but you might find interesting. So you can go find an article on Native Americans and that culture to learn how to work with it. Do you know what I'm saying? If you read an article and like on after,
What do you have going on here?
teaching you
It's
how
my
to